Okay, let's do it.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the ORS webinar, Career Transitions After a Doctoral Degree, sponsored by ORS New Investigator Mentoring Committee. My name is Carl Lewis, a PhD student at the City College of New York and a member of the New Investigator Mentoring Committee. I will host this webinar today together with Professor Lucas Liu. Dr. Liu is a faculty at the University of Delaware and the incoming chair of our committee. So please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the web. All webinar participants will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions box in the menu located to the right side of your screen. We will address the questions at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar will provide insight into how investigators can prepare for and meet the expectations intrinsic to successfully navigating their professional life. We have two wonderful speakers, Professor Henry Donahue and Professor Marjolein van der Meulen. Our first speaker is Dr. Donahue. Dr. Donahue is the School of Engineering Foundation Professor and Chair of the Biomedical Engineering Department at Virginia Commonwealth University. Prior to that, he was Vice Chair, Michael and Myrtle Baker Professor, and Director of the Division of Musculoskeletal Sciences at Penn State College of Medicine in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Professor Donahue received his PhD at UC Santa Barbara and trained as a postdoc at the Mayo Graduate School of Medicine. He's been continually funded as a PI by the NIH for nearly 25 years and has also had funding from the Department of Defense, private foundations, and industry. He's currently funded by the Musculoskeletal Transplant Foundation, National Space Biology Research Institute, and the NIH. He has generated over $13 million in extramural support during his career, and Dr. Donahue has mentored 12 postdoctoral fellows, and all except for one of whom have become faculty at excellent universities, including Penn State, University of Michigan, University of California, Davis, University of Akron, Colorado State, Indiana University, University of Nebraska, and the University of Rochester. 4 of his former postdoctoral trainees are tenured full professors. He's also mentored over 30 graduate students and numerous medical and undergraduate students, as well as several junior faculty. Dr. Donahue's research interests are regenerative medicine, bone tissue engineering, and bone mechanobiology. And he's also an AIMBE fellow. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Donahue.
Thanks, Carl. That was a very nice introduction. And thank you and Lucas for inviting me to present this webinar. So I'm going to give an overview of how to transition from a faculty, from a postdoc or graduate school to a faculty position or whatever one's next step would be, including jobs in industry or jobs at the NIH or other government organizations. Most of this is based on my experience with different issues about transitioning and mentorship. Some of this might overlap a bit with Dr. van der Meulen's talk, but I think that's okay because it'll lead to you and the people attending this getting sort of different perspectives, because obviously on these sort of issues there are different perspectives. So I'm going to start out discussing and spend some time discussing what mentoring is and what one has to do to be a good mentor and what one has to do to be a good mentee. So most people understand that scientific mentoring is a personal one-on-one relationship between a more experienced scientist and a junior scientist or a scientist in the making. It doesn't necessarily have to be one-on-one. Oftentimes there's mentoring committees, but I think the most effective mentoring is if you can get one-on-one and a very personal style of mentoring. A good book that I found online, and you can take a moment, well, you're not going to be able to, we can have somebody at ORS send you this URL, or if you just search "Making the Right Moves" and Howard Hughes Medical Institute, you'll probably get sent to the website. But this is a free online book that has a lot of practical advice for scientific management for postdocs and faculty. And actually, scientific management is something that most graduate students aren't taught, and so you kind of learn the hard way by making mistakes. And this book will perhaps help you avoid some of those common mistakes. So I highly recommend looking at it. So what are the traits of a good mentor? Mentors have to be, good mentors have to be accessible. So I and most of the good mentors I know have pretty much an open door policy and are very, very approachable. You know, having an hour a week or 2 hours a week that you devote to mentoring, from my perspective, isn't really adequate. If you're a mentor with somebody, they need to get a hold of you sometimes at odd hours and all different places. So I think it's important to have this sort of open door policy. Another important attribute is empathy, and so this means personal insight into what a trainee has experienced. So all of us, all professors have been graduate students at some time. Some of them have been graduate students and worked in industry and have had various experiences that will make them good mentors. It's especially important, they've written grants and they've had grants turned down, and so they know what it's like to get rejected when you're writing grants, to get rejected when you're writing manuscripts. So this is a very important trait to have as a mentor. Mentors have to be very open-minded and respect each trainee's individuality and working styles and career goals. And I think this has changed a lot over the last many years. I think at one time in graduate school, taking the academic path after you graduate was seen as the only really important or worthwhile track to take, but that's changed dramatically, and I incorporate that into my mentoring. So if one can identify early on what they want to do, whether they, after graduate school, whether they want to take a traditional academic route at a traditional university or at a college of medicine, or do they want to work in industry, or do they want to work for a government organization? I think if you can identify that with your mentor, a good mentor will help you get experiences that will better situate you for success in the career path that you've chosen. So I think most modern thinking mentors aren't saying that academics is the only place you can go. It's one place, but there's other just as important, just as viable options. Another important trait is consistency. So you should, teach and lead by example if you're going to be a good mentor. Have patience. Clearly, people make mistakes and people learn things at a different rate, and you have to understand these different learning styles. And this is often a hard one for mentors of graduate students and postdocs, when the graduate student and postdoc might be working on data that's going to be in a grant application, and the PI is really pressuring the person to get the data. But I think as a mentor, you have to appreciate and be patient. And I think I should have started by saying this, but I think by realizing the traits of a good mentor, that will help you pick one out. It'll help you be a better mentee and eventually evolve into a good mentor. Very important in science, and it goes without saying, is honesty. I mean, probably for a scientist or an engineer, honesty is the most important quality, because people have to trust that your data was generated in a unbiased fashion. You also have to be honest towards communicating with graduate students or postdocs or junior faculty about what they are good and bad at. And this is very hard to do, especially for me, but what I've come to realize is if especially with a graduate student or postdoc, if their performance is clearly indicating that this line of work isn't for them because they're struggling so much, you really do them a disservice if you don't let them know that, because eventually they'll find that out in perhaps a less friendly environment. So I think it's important as a mentor to be honest about the chances of a student or postdoc in making it in whatever line they want to work. And as a mentee, you should appreciate that. And then there should be attention to the pragmatic aspects of career development, which relates to having open-minded about what types of jobs people go for after graduation or their postdoc, and actually incorporate some career development in your training program. So strategies for effective mentoring in your lab: try to make everything a learning opportunity, whether you're taking students to a meeting, or introducing them to people, or writing grants with them, or going over data with them. Everything you do, they're learning. To the extent that you're a role model, they're learning from that. I'm pretty bad at the second one, which is setting specific goals and measuring accomplishment. But I think that's important, and it's something that I'm always trying to improve in how I work on a day-to-day basis. Uphold professional standards for it speaks for itself, I think. Teach all the skills you have, whether it's actually laboratory skills or grant writing skills or data analysis skills. Teach those to your mentee. And if you're a mentee, strive to learn those skills from your mentor. Extremely as important is to provide networking opportunities, introduce your graduate students and postdocs to colleagues of yours. If you're a mentee, ask to be introduced. This is really, really important. I think engineers get this to a better degree than like biomedical scientists get this. Some biomedical scientists feel that if they're good enough, people will find out about them on their own, and you don't have to engage in this sort of networking. But I think it's very, very important to do that. The other obvious thing is to provide moral support and sort of serve as a cheerleader for your mentee. So here's some examples of how one can be mentored well, and mentorship is a two-way street. So if you want to do well as a mentee, you've got to be sort of assertive in this sort of relationship so you can get something from your mentor. Very important is start early in your career, even as a graduate student. Start building that, or even as an undergraduate student, I would say. Start building networks, start building mentors for different aspects of your career. Start to experience different career paths, perhaps, if you don't know where you want to go yet. The second one is very important. Don't expect to be taken care of. You have to be, as I said, one has to be assertive as a mentee. Don't expect somebody to come and knock on your door and say, "Hey, Hank, I want to be your mentor." That's not going to happen. You have to go out and find these things yourself. Some institutions have formal programs, and if your institution does, you should avail yourself of those programs. Ask tough questions. Ask other people about their experiences, both positive and negative, with a potential mentor. Be polite, obviously. Make and keep appointments. This seems very obvious, but I've been mentors of people that never made an appointment with me, and so I'm not really sure they're that interested in having me as a mentor. So you've got to really be, the mentee really has to be engaged in this relationship, or it just won't work. Everybody likes to be thanked, that's true. You can repay your mentor by helping others and becoming a mentor yourself, and I think that will make you a better scientist and make you a better individual. And be willing to accept critical feedback. This is really, really important because, at least in biology, almost all the experiments one does fail until you start getting things right. And so it's really important to accept critical feedback and be open to learning new ways of thinking and doing science. So you have to have not much of an ego if you really want to get far in scientific or engineering positions. Key to good mentoring is to sincerely desire the success of the mentee, build trust so that you can be open with one another, be open and honest. I think it's important to have, it's just being in academics or industry or government organizations. These can all be very, very stressful and demanding positions, so it's important to have a sense of humor. Mentors have to allow independence at some point, and this I found has been a problem with some mentors and mentees for that matter. But especially with postdocs, eventually, they have to be out on their own, especially if they're going into academics. They have to have some record of independence, and a mentor has to be willing to do that, and some mentors are less willing to do that than others. Teach written and oral communication. This is something that's generally not taught in undergraduate or graduate science and engineering. It's obviously critically important. If you can't write well, if you can't communicate your scientific results, you might as well not have done the experiments or designed whatever you designed if you can't communicate that to somebody. And then finally, help them find a job. And I think this is really important for a mentor, and the mentee should realize this and try to get it from a mentor, that there is a job training component to graduate and postdoctoral studies and undergraduate studies, and this maybe wasn't appreciated by faculty many years ago, but I think it's really appreciated more and more by what I would call modern thinking faculty. So I put a little bit in here about startup, and different places will have different startup packages. These are sort of general of what I've experienced in the last couple of years. It's very dependent on what you do. If you're doing molecular biology, cell culture, and animal studies versus computer modeling, the differences in startup may be dramatic. But these are just some ballpark figures, and others on the panel can agree or disagree with these. How long, in my experience, startup packages are usually 3 to 5 years, and it can be distributed in different ways as a lump sum, which you spend on anything, or might include specific staff or specific graduate students or even specific equipment. Most places ask for a wish list of equipment you would need to be successful. I think when you're negotiating these things, you should appreciate that a lot of equipment might only be at the institution or the department you're going, and if it's not used very much, you should inquire whether that can be shared and whether you really need that to need one of your own to do the work, or can you share it and people are willing to share. The way space is negotiated in different places is much different. Some departments have open lab space where the lab space is shared. Others have it where it's very, very because of the physical outlay, it's hard to share lab space. So each faculty has a designated faculty or lab area. I think my advice would be keep an open mind. If your research can be done in sort of a shared space and you trust the person who's providing that shared space, you can get usually a lot more if the circumstances are right from that sort of space, as opposed to absolutely demanding 600 square feet of your own. But it depends, once again, on what work you do, what the environment and culture is at the institution you're going to. And I think whatever you do in a startup package, you should get it in writing. And it's not because getting it in writing is anything that you'll use as a legal document at some point if you're cheated out of your startup funds. It's more of a way to remind both the person taking the position and the person offering the position a mechanism to remember exactly what was promised, because really these can be different, and people can forget that they said, oh yeah, I'll give you a graduate student for 4 years. I thought I said I'd give you a graduate student for 2 years. So get it in writing, and most people that are offering jobs will will be receptive to you getting the offer in writing. And the offer, that obviously this includes salary, the startup package, the lab space, your teaching expectations, your research expectations. All of that should be included in a startup in a letter of offer. People have asked me, how do you figure out the budget? It really depends on what one does. Who keeps track of it? Well, ultimately, it's the responsibility of the PI, but hopefully you're in an environment where you get some assistance in doing that and you have somebody that's dedicated to handling budgets. But it's important to remember that the granting agency considers you responsible, and if you overspend a grant or don't overspend it and have to give some money back, that's ultimately your responsibility to follow that sort of thing. I'm also asked, what's your philosophy on who to hire first when you're starting a lab? The options are technicians, which can work independently and focus on your objectives, but they are often costly. Grad students are less independent, perhaps less well-trained, but training grad students is, at most places, at least in academia, is an important contribution to the teaching mission of the university, and it also can be quite fun. Postdocs can work independently, they're cost-effective, and can be semi-colleagues, but it's important that they have their own takeaway projects, and you will allow them to evolve some independence, and they shouldn't be there forever. These horror stories of people doing 8, 9, 10-year postdocs, you really should try to avoid that because it's not going to help you, and it's certainly not going to help the postdoc. But of course, all this is situation dependent. Obviously, whether you're in industry or a government organization or academic college of medicine or a college that teaches undergraduate students, it's all relatively situation dependent. And then there's this so-called best player philosophy, which is it doesn't matter whether it's a technician, a grad student, or a postdoc, as long as you get outstanding people. And that's true to some extent, but I mean, it depends what your situation is, again. And finally, I just want to end with a slide on what it takes to do successful collaborations, because maybe eventually you're going to have to collaborate, especially now when it's so hard to get funding in academics, at least. And as I've mentioned before, it's really, really important to go into these sort of collaborations without any ego whatsoever. Be willing to learn a new scientific or engineering language. Be willing to ask questions that may make you look naive. Don't be afraid to look naive, I'd say. And so it really takes self-confidence to be able to be like that and to learn new things. And it's important, no matter where you get your job, you have to communicate well. Almost all of the problems I face in my professional life and personal life, for that matter, is largely a result of lack of communication. So it's really important to remember that. And then finally, you want to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and being self-confident enough to ask questions so that you can learn from these people. And with that, I think we're going to take questions at the end of the whole thing, so we'll go on back to Carl, I guess.
Thanks, Dr. Donahue, for sharing your insight and expertise with us today. So I want to remind you all that if you do have any questions, please click on the questions box on the right side of your screen. There's a little menu there where you can do that. So our second speaker today will be Professor Marjolein van der Meulen. Dr. van der Meulen is the James M. and Marcia McCormick Director of the Nancy E. and Peter C. School of Biomedical Engineering, and the Swanson Professor in the Manig School of Biomedical Engineering, and the Sibley School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at Cornell University, as well as a Senior Scientist in the Research Division of the Hospital for Special Surgery. Prior to her current position, Dr. van der Meulen served as the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Engineering at Cornell. And before joining the faculty at Cornell, Marjolein worked as a biomedical engineer at the Rehabilitation R&D Center of the Department of Veterans Affairs in Palo Alto, California. She received her bachelor's from MIT and her master's and PhD from Stanford University. In 1995, she received an NIH First Award, and in 1999, an NSF Faculty Early Career Development Award. She was a co-PI and co-founder of the NSF-funded CU Advance Center for Hiring, Promotion, Retention, and Advancement of Women Faculty. She's a fellow of the AAAS, the AIMBE, and the ASME. Dr. Vandermeulen's research is in orthopedic biomechanics and focuses on the interaction between mechanical stimuli and the skeleton and the mechanical properties of musculoskeletal tissues. Thanks for being with us today, Dr. Vandermeulen.
Thank you so much, Carl and Lucas. I really appreciate the opportunity to join this and present today. So I want to, oops, are we advancing? Hold on. So I want to just reiterate the topics that were laid out for this webinar, and I'm going to really focus on the three, not the first mentoring, because I think Hank did a fantastic job talking about mentoring, and I don't think I could add much, with one additional point, though, that I do want to make on mentoring, which is he described all the qualities of a good mentor and a mentee, but realize also that your mentors change with situation, and so Virginia Valian, who's a social scientist at Hunter College, has a concept of a circle of mentors, and so I have, like, everyone should have, you have different mentors for different things. So I have people I go to for teaching and for some of my professional things, and so realize that who you need at a given time in your career and for different things varies also. But then again, the characteristics and how to be a mentor, I can't add anything to what Hank said. He did such a good job. So I want to touch a little bit more on resources. He already laid out the startup stuff, and then talk a little bit about personnel, and then a lot of intangibles about transition also. I think when you think about career transitions, as Hank said at the beginning, there's different, some of you are graduate students that are going to a postdoc position. These things apply to a postdoc, maybe not quite to the same extent some of the startup questions, but they still are questions you should be asking and questions you should be positioning yourself for. And then the bigger step where is the post-academic career, and a lot of what I'm going to say is about academia, and it's tainted a little bit by your views, and I just want to emphasize that I come from a main campus, not a medical school. I'm in a college of engineering, and so some of basically our job responsibilities are different as a result, and I'll touch on some of that. These things, though, also apply going to an industry or government positions, especially if you're running research groups there. So I think all the same concepts apply. So with that, I want to start with talking about some of the resource issues. Hank did a really nice job of laying out what goes in a startup package. I've laid it out a little bit here also, and just want to touch on a couple of different things that are sort of philosophy. I just want to also say I'm in a chair position right now, so I'm in the position where I am helping to hire faculty and negotiate startups, and I also do people's annual reviews and things like that, so these issues come up frequently in my current job. So a lot of what I'm talking about is from that experience. So, you know, I think Hank already touched on equipment funds and what you need, and salary is very area dependent, and then also you're going to need personnel support, and again, that's already been touched on. I want to say just a little bit about space. You need to think about what you need for space. It's also field specific, but realize that things like renovations take time and money, and you need to think about how if those are coming out of your startup package, or how those are funded and what you need. And so just realize that those are things you also should, and actually you should see them actually when you look at these opportunities. And then the other big point I want to make is that realize in all these discussions on startup packages, we want to hire you. We have made an offer to you, and we made this offer because you are our final candidate, and we want to hire you. So we need to work towards that, and we all have the same goal. That being said, in your package, for me, not all money is equal across categories, and so that's why I've split out personnel from equipment up here, because for me, actually, as an engineering faculty member, some of my personnel support comes from fellowship support. For example, I have endowments that are for fellowships. So student support in my startup packages is listed differently because it's a different pot of money. And in some cases, equipment funds can also be different pots of money. So think about, realize that understand some of the conditions under which you're negotiating and you're asking for things, because it affects how I put money where and what my flexibility is. And therefore, I added this category of creative options, because creative options are really often win-win. And so they allow us to make money go further. They allow us to get you access to things that you really need, but maybe I can't afford. I mean, one of the things we're facing in the current modern science environment are really expensive equipment. So we have a lot of shared facilities at every university that are there for people because they're so expensive. So figure out, like, if you can use those, maybe I can give you credit towards those facilities in your startup. That may be different than cash at some institutions. I know of a friend of mine who had machine shop use hours given as part of his startup because he knew he needed equipment made. So think about other ways of reaching your goals that aren't just straight hard cash, because sometimes hard cash, flexible cash is the hardest thing to get, and sometimes there's other ways of getting this. Another possibility is, like, we have faculty who needed very expensive equipment, and we actually, departments ended up sharing that equipment cost with a shared facility, so the equipment became a user facility, but the faculty hire had the priority or managed it and thereby had more use of it. So, but they would not have, they would have used their whole startup package otherwise, and this allowed them to get this piece of equipment while and access to it and preferred access while getting it to the bigger campus community. And then another example is matching for grants. Again, I know of a faculty member here who needed an piece of equipment that is just exorbitantly expensive, and so Cornell committed to saying, look, we will support you for a shared instrument grant. For an NSF shared instrument grant, you have to fund a certain portion of you have to have a certain amount of matching funds for that piece of equipment, and so we guaranteed that the institution would provide the matching, and that if she got the grant, she had the equipment and whatever money we had to provide as an institution. So there's lots of creative, flexible ways, and they're all about us finding ways of getting you what you need. And so, again, we're all on the same page, but we have to be creative. And so realize sometimes if all you're asking for is hard cash, there's problems, but there's lots of ways around it that get you what you need. Because ultimately, if that's, you need to get the research done, you need the equipment, you need certain facilities, and so it's all about how we make that happen. So then there's a couple of things to think about in this, and questions you should ask, I think. And so I call those considerations. I'm not sure what they are, but as you look at salary, you need to understand what the system is for the salary, whether it's a 9-month or a 12-month system. So in engineering, most institutions are 9-month. Actually, there's some places that are 12-month, that are 10-month as well. And then those other months are what are known as summer salary, and you need to understand how summer salary gets allocated, what you can pay it off. In engineering, you teach. We all teach. We have a 50, basically, nominally my job is 50% teaching, 50% research for all my faculty. And so you should know what the teaching load is, if you can buy yourself out or not. At Cornell, for example, you can't. But we do, in most of our packages in the startups, already offer teaching relief in the first 2 years. So you have a semester off of teaching, and you need to understand sort of the conditions that those happen under. Another sort of intangible thing is the service expectations. So this is beyond startup, and maybe it's a second order thing, but you need to know a little bit about what other things you're expected. So we always think of faculty members as a three-legged stool. It's research and teaching, but the third leg is service. And service school as well as professional, so understand what's involved with that. Startup date is another thing that can actually flex, and so I have a faculty member who was going to start in January, but for us it's actually easier to start on cycle sort of in the summer, because a lot of things for new faculty happen in the summer or in the beginning of the fall semester. So she had a flexibility where she was, and she could have pushed last summer but decided to stay an extra year in her postdoc and is coming in this coming summer. And so realize that that start date is something you can negotiate over, and actually I negotiated when I started over that as well. And then there's some questions to ask about your startup, and Hank has already referred to some of this. So are there things it can't be spent on? Is it cold cash, or does it have limitations? I discovered mine had some when I didn't know about it, when I went to spend it on certain things. Need to know how available is it before you get there. Can you start, and you want to start ordering equipment, especially things that have lead time before you get to campus, right? Especially if you have some time before you arrive, there's overlap there. So need to know how much is available before you start. And then when I started, there were no expiration dates on startup. Nowadays, there's hard and fast expiration dates, and so you need to know how long is this valid. Hank said 3 to 5 years. That's a good estimate, but it's different by institution and by area, so understand it. And then I already talked about being creative, but think of ways of making those funds go further. How can you leverage it and make it worth more than just the dollar number, and that's important. And then the last point is laboratory design and renovations. I remember when I was asked, and said, it's literally, where do you want the lab benches? And I had not really thought about that. So those are things to look about at your current situation, think about what works, what doesn't work. And then also renovations, again, take time. And so make sure that those are, if there's time before you start, or if the lab needs it, that's factored in. And if it's not factored in, by the way, we've had some issues here on campus with renovations taking longer. you can ask for an extension on your tenure clock. So realize that there's, again, flexibility there in how you do that, I think. So those are known issues, and so just think ahead. Hank has said a lot already on staffing, and more eloquently than I can. I just wanted to make a couple points, which is you're going to need people. Everybody needs people in the lab. So you need to think about where to start. And one of the things is to know the culture. And for me, in the main academic campus culture and in the engineering culture, it's different than in the medical culture. And so there's a heavy emphasis on graduate students. And actually, if you come up for tenure and you haven't mentored graduate students, around here, that's a huge tenure metric. And so know what you need to have in place and know what's the expectations. And it's not really written down, but it's definitely an expectation. So think about that. So that's the big culture thing. And then again, and the evaluation metrics associated with tenure. And so that really affects how you start. Also, your student quality matters. That's something you should, when you interview, you should be wanting to meet grad students. You need to know, what are the students like, what's the interest in your area, and things like that. And then the other thing to think about is how you reach out to potential candidates. Think of your personal networks, but then also figure out in your new institution what the resources are. If you're trying to post job ads, I'm still learning about those around here, actually. There's local bulletin boards. There's also stuff because of, a lot of small towns, like I live in Ithaca, have a lot of spouses that are looking for jobs, and so you plug into networks locally as well, and think about that as you look to hire people. And then Hank's already talked a little about the categories. I categorize them a little bit differently. So technicians and postdocs are very, very much employees. They're a little different than students, and in my case, undergraduates also work in the lab. There's pros and cons of employees versus students. Again, I leave that to you, but think about the differences in terms of, there's differences in terms of cost, there's differences in terms of how long they're in your lab. Postdoc is generally a shorter residency than a graduate student. There's things you can do over a 5-year graduate career that are harder to do with someone who's only intending to be in your lab for a year or two. Independence is also different between employees type positions and students, and then also intellectual contribution. A lot of technicians haven't read the literature, for example, whereas for students that's part of their responsibility, and so maybe you need that, maybe you don't. If you come in and you have a good vision, you just need someone to implement it. You may need different people then. So those are all things to think about as you decide who to hire and how to staff. Then just a little bit more, remember communication is super important, and Hank's already said a lot about this, and this is both during the interview when you're looking to hire people to set your expectations, but then also when they're starting, and think about what you're willing to accept, sort of, in your expectations, like what is set in stone and what is flexible, and some of this will evolve over time, but I've seen this now with staff around myself. Flexibility of hours matters to me, actually, and vacation timing. Some faculty don't want staff to take vacation at certain times. You should make that clear up front. Do you want them to be available on the weekends? Do they have to read their email off hours? That's for an employee type person. Those are actually things you have to be very specific about. So think about that. And you may not know the answers, but those are going to evolve. And so think, if you look around you, because those are things that in some cases you've never thought about until you have to sort of hire someone. And then it's really important to spend the time on training, because that gets everything off and this relationship off on the right foot, especially with technical technicians. And then finally, some institutions you have a hiring probationary period, and if something doesn't work out or isn't going to work out, take advantage of that probationary period. And in some cases, it's very hard if it doesn't work out to make changes outside that. So therefore, think about that and see if that's an option or not, because sometimes that makes a big difference. So then I want to spend a little bit more time on this category of additional considerations, dual career, prior commitments, and just starting your lab stuff. So for dual career, it's always a big question when you bring up if your spouse needs a position or not. So the bottom line is tell us early. If you don't tell us, we can't do anything about it. And the sooner we know about it, the sooner we can start working on it. In reality, again, if I want to hire you, I want to hire you for you, and I need to solve your problems, right? And if your spouse needs a position or your partner needs a position, if I don't know about it, I can't help. And so realize, though, that the types of solutions depend on some of the norms. In a place like Ithaca, which is a small town, some of our norms are different. We spend more time on this probably than some of the people in big cities do, because there's a lot of jobs and there's more options there. But on the flip side is academic versus non-academics. 2 academic jobs can be hard, and so I have, I think, sometimes an advantage in Ithaca because I'm more likely to know the department chair and other departments, and we shop CVs a lot. But Here it depends a lot on the department actually if I'm likely to have success or not, but realize that the solutions differ and start early, because if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it. And so that's really important. Besides spouse, family is an important thing too. So the types of schools, if you need special schools, children's activities, and then also sometimes some of these schools, especially preschools and daycare, have waiting lists. And so, figuring out the culture, figuring out what's necessary there, do it early and ask. If you don't ask, we can't tell you. And most of our, again, when we're trying to recruit you to come here, we want you to have this information. We will tell you whatever you need, and we'll do our best, and there's lots of people with similar situations, so you have to say something. Just a little bit on, you're coming from a position where you have commitments, and so think ahead. Think about what, do you have experiments that, will all your experiments be done when you leave, or will you still be running experiments? You're likely to have publications still in process. It's actually very hard to, graduate students, when you leave, it's very hard to wrap up papers in your postdoc, so think ahead. Think about what you're leaving behind and what has to be done, and it's a lot easier to talk about these things in person. And anticipate these and sit down and talk to the collaborators at your current institution about how you're going to keep it going when you leave, or what needs to be done before you leave, because it can't be done after you leave, right? And then one thing that's, I think, really important for transition is thinking about adjunct or visiting appointments. So this new faculty member that I have starting this summer, she has a visiting appointment here already, and that allows her to submit grants now. So she starts July 1 or around then, but she's already submitted grants at Cornell because she's going to, there's a long turnaround time on these things, and some things have come up that were really good matches with what she does, and so we gave her a visiting appointment, so she has status at Cornell, allows her to write grants now. And the same applies to when you leave somewhere. If you're a postdoc, you may have mentored students that still need advice from you, or you may even have grants that have people on them, so you may need an appointment to keep money there to fund them, or to make things happen after you leave. So think about at both sides of the equation, where you're leaving and where you're going, if there's things you can do to help with the transition. And usually there are things there, but you have to think of them in advance, and they're a lot easier to do when you're on site than when you've left. And then a couple some nuts and bolts and logistics, I guess, associated with the start. Realize that when you've been in labs that are set up, and now this is your lab. You walk in and you get an empty space, and this is your space, right? But your space needs to pass everything locally before it can do anything. So you need to meet with your environmental health and safety people, meet with your radioactivity officers, talk to the biosafety committee, because if you have to bring in animals and just think ahead and send, because everything's in place wherever you've been, but now you've got this blank slate, and you need licenses for all sorts of things. In New York State, you need a needle license for syringes, right? So if you don't have a needle license, but you can share with people, but you need to figure that out. And some of those, before you can file an animal protocol, you need training, and so you need those animal protocols to get your lab moving. So you need to complete that training first. So there's a whole bunch of things like that are transition things, and think ahead. So there's the animal training, the IRBs for human subjects, material transfer agreements, that are MTAs, non-disclosures if you already have companies you want to work for, but you may need to bring stuff from where you were, which would require an MTA. So there's a lot of things there to just complete and start early with them, so you don't get held up by this stuff. Also, wherever in your new institution, know the key offices, know your departmental staff. Who's the department manager? They're going to help you with hiring. Who's finance? They're going to help you with budgets. Facilities people, like I spend a lot of time with my facilities guy, like every hole drilled in my lab, he and I did together pretty much, and some of it was legal, some of it wasn't actually, because some places you have to use all union shops, but know what that is, go in and ask these questions. And also the grants office is really important. So in ours, it's called sponsored projects where I am. Some people it's grants and contracts, but figure out who those people are, because they're going to be your best friends for all these proposals you're going to write. So start early and know what their lead time is, so you're not surprised by things and have problems up front. And then coming in, the people, like identify potential collaborators, start early when you get here, because again, you're going to write proposals. It's going to take some time to get to know these people, and it's easier if you've had lunch with them when you got there and started to interact with people. And then the whole concept of mentors. You need to identify who's a good mentor. And I did the opposite when I came here. I asked for a mentor, and they said, who do you suggest? So think about these. Some of that's easier to think about in advance. Some of it's not. Some of you need to meet people, see what the chemistry is, talk to them, and see how it goes. And then the last point I have here is look. There's a faculty handbook at most places, and that handbook describes a little bit about the structure of the institution. And I wouldn't study it, but I would glance through it, because it's going to help you know a little bit about your local environment. And if this is hopefully your local environment that you're coming into, if it's a faculty position or an industry job, you're hopefully going to be there for some time, so it helps to understand it. So ask for it. They'll give it to you. Actually, hopefully they'll give it to you automatically, but take a look. So those are the things. There's others, but these are the three categories of things that I thought of. I think there's a lot of other intangibles, and I would say ask. The most you can do here is ask questions. Ask your PhD mentors, ask your postdoc mentors, ask your former group members that have gone through this process already. There's a lot of resources, and a lot of, the goal is to help you avoid our mistakes, and so, ask what you can. The other thing I would say, and Hank referred to this as well, remember also, once you've gone through this, to reach back and help those that are younger that are going to go through the same process, because you learn a lot from it, and our goal is to keep the cycle going and share it with the next generation as well. So with that, I think we're open for the whole webinar for questions and answers at this point. And thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Van der Meulen. I'm going to hand it over to Lucas now for the Q&A.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, everyone. This is Lucas. I will monitor the question and answer session of this webinar. If you have any questions, please click on the question box in the menu on the right side of your screen. You can type your questions there. So our first question is from Jusa Hanzilik. And the question is, do you think that people who did industry work for 5 to 10 years can return to academia? So Hank, can you address this question?
Sure, I'll try, but Dr. Van der Meulen might have more experience in this area. Obviously, everything's possible. One of the chairs of another department at the VCU School of Engineering was in industry for a really long time and was very successful, and now has gone into academia as a chair. I think it depends where you are. If you're in engineering departments, that's probably, my guess is, that happens more often than it does in sort of biologically oriented departments, but not necessarily. What do you think, Mary Eileen?
I agree with Hank somewhat. I think that it depends also on what you did in industry. So if you're coming out of, so there's also biological companies. I guess I did a part of my first sabbatical at Genentech, and they're publishing it's active biological research. And so I think the transition from certain types of industry research positions where you're already doing research, you're running groups, your research is focused on the mission of the company, but nonetheless you have an expertise, and so you're not so different from academics. So I think you can transition then. What I was told a long time ago, and this was one of the reasons I decided to leave the VA when I did, was that it's in engineering, or just in general, it's easy to come in early in your career and much later, as Hank just said. So coming in as a chair, I also know some deans that have come in from industry. So there's a middle ground where it's a little harder, but there's a point in industry where you're more senior, you've had an amazing amount of experience and exposure, and you bring that to academics, and so you bring a little bit different than the traditional, writing tons of papers and getting research grants, but you still are going to have to do that when you come into this world. So that's why some people come in as chairs and deans as well. But I think it depends on the type of position, and then we also, and then the other you're coming from, but then also the type of position you're going to. So a lot of places have a professor of the practice now. So we have at Cornell a new title that's called Professor of the Practice in Engineering, and it's for people that are from industry. It's not tenured the same way, but we realize the value that someone who's had a long industrial career has, and so it's all about bringing that in. So when we look at teaching senior design and engineering, industry perspective and experience is fantastic, and so a lot of our departments have that type of a position for teaching, especially senior design type courses in engineering.
Okay, great. That's a great answer. Thank you both. And our second question actually is from Dr. Zhang at UMPC, and his question is how to differentiate the research interest from supervisor. So again, Hank, can you start with that?
Sure. This is a really important question, and it goes back to building trust and sharing expectations between the postdoc and the PI, or the graduate student and the PI. This is something I would get, if I were taking a postdoc, for instance, today, I would get that clear from my advisor at what will what will I be able to, how will I be able to develop independence? And a good mentor will have a plan for that. But it is a touchy area. There's really good scientists or engineers out there that aren't very good at building independent faculty or independent scientists or independent engineers out of their labs. So I think my advice is to identify that early on, identify somebody that has a plan for your independence, but appreciate that often in a postdoc you're getting paid to do something fairly specific, but you should be able to carve out an area of something that you can take with you that you won't necessarily be competing with your former PI. So that's sort of what I think.
Thanks, Ken. Professor Van der Meulen, do you have anything to add?
Not much. I would agree with Hank that it's very much at the postdoc stage. When I look at, so I've not had a lot of postdocs. I've mainly had graduate students, and my graduate students, if you look at what they're doing now, they've launched their independent careers off their postdocs, or by combining what they did as a graduate student in my lab, that they changed directions as a postdoc to add a new set of skills. And then what differentiates them very much from what I do is that they've combined the postdoc skills with what they had learned, what they had started with in my lab, and now that's what they've done in their independent. So I think thinking about it when you transition to a postdoc is quite important, how you combine these to make yourself unique, and often that's what the postdoc very much allows you to do.
Okay, great, thank you. And our next question is from Richard Miller, a faculty member at Rush University, and her question is how to manage time efficiently in order to accomplish all that is expected of junior faculty. I believe most junior faculty have similar questions. So Professor Van der Meulen, do you mind go first with this one?
Yes, no, I don't mind going first, but I would say it's a question that stays with you throughout your career, and I would argue that I'm still working on managing my time efficiently. It's just what you're managing changes as you move up. You know, you need to prioritize, and I also think a lot of junior faculty think that if they take a break, you know, 1 hour isn't going to make or break your tenure case, isn't going to make or break your grant, you know, so I do think there's a lot of research now showing how important mental breaks are, right? So a lot of junior faculty, they don't come to some of the things that are exactly meant for them. So, you know, it's ironic, we run workshops on time management, but the people who don't show up are the assistant professors because they think they have too much to do and they're too busy, and there's, you know, I got to get tenure, oh my God, and that's exactly who these things are aimed at. So there's lots of tricks you can do and things you can do for how you manage your time, but if you don't go to these workshops, go and spend some time thinking about it, then you spend a lot of inefficient time. So I think setting bounds on things, making sure you carve out some time for yourself, some mental health time, and for what that is for different people differs, but you know, we all have different interests, be they sports, be they, you know, I've picked up knitting recently. You know, there's an article about how important knitting is mentally. So there's all sorts of things you can do for a mental break, but make sure you do them. And then the other thing is family. And family really matters. And, you know, unfortunately, there's a high divorce rate post-tenure. And don't be one of those statistics, because ultimately after tenure you want your family, and during tenure you need your family, right? So don't skimp on some of those things, because you're never going to get them back. And so that I look around and I see there's some mistakes there, right? And so don't make those, and think ahead about that. But think about it, because if you don't think about it, if you just stay in auto drive and you know, think all you have to do is work, you spend a lot of time that's not efficiently spent, and that's you're going to look back and regret it. And the goal is to not do that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Our next question is how much experience in grant writing, mentoring, teaching are institutions looking for in a postdoc? So this time, Dr. Donahue, can you go first?
I'm not sure. I guess the question means if you're coming into a postdoc, what are the institutions expecting of you, or
I think the question is if you are a postdoc and are looking for a faculty job, okay, and you know, what the department is expecting in grant writing, mentoring, and teaching.
Well, so I think it's very much dependent on where the position is. if it's an academic position, it matters where it is too. So if you're going to a college of medicine where there's no undergraduate students and a lot of faculty and not very many medical or graduate students, then teaching is much less expected, and therefore writing grants is much more expected. If you're at a more traditional campus where there's undergraduates, you'll be expected to write grants also, but probably not to the extent that you do at a College of Medicine, because you're contributing to the mission by teaching undergraduates. And of course, people have to realize that oh, this is money driven, so universities want faculty to generate income, and you can do that by writing grants, or you can do that by teaching and helping bring in tuition. So it's really dependent on where you are. Of course, if you're in industry, from my experience, I've never been in the industry, but I'm guessing you're not writing grants, you're not teaching directly, you might be training people, and the same with certain research institutes. So I think it's really dependent on where you go, whether it's academic, and then what type of academic. I mean, it could also, there's places you may get a job at a liberal arts college teaching biology, or engineering for that matter, and the expectations for teaching will be even greater than they were at a university, I'd imagine. So it's really dependent on where you're going.
Thanks. Dr. Van der Meulen, do you have anything to add on this question?
No, I think Hank covered it well.
Okay, great. So due to a time issue, we will end the Q&A session here. This webinar will be uploaded to the OIS website in the coming week. And on the website, you will also find the videos for our previous webinars, such as how to find a faculty job and talk with NIH officers. In the coming annual OIS meeting in Orlando, our committee will organize a Meet the NIH staff session. So if you want to talk with some NIH program officers, there will be around 10 of them in the event. So you will have plenty of opportunity to talk with them. And to attend this session, you have to register for it when you register for the OIS conference. Lastly, upon exiting the webinar, you will be asked to complete a shorter survey. Please do the evaluation and make any suggestions on how we can improve moving forward. Your input is greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone in advance for completing the survey and for joining us today. Thank you to our two great speakers, Dr. Donohue and Dr. Van der Meulen. See you in the Disney World. And this concludes the ORS webinar, Career Transitions After a Doctoral Degree. Thank you.